Good morning once again, everyone. I'm very, very thankful that you all could join me once again. We left off in 1 Samuel 14, where it's a long, long chapter, 1 Samuel 14. It's 52 verses, I believe. And the reason for it being so long is that you see at the end of chapter 14 of 1 Samuel, you see how we're being told about Saul fighting these wars, and he's fighting all the different neighboring nations. He's vexing everyone. And the reason why it does that is because there's such a big gap in between 1 Samuel 14 and 1 Samuel 15. Whenever we come here to the first verse of 1 Samuel 15, we see that it's about, in my estimation, somewhere around 30 years later. Some people will tell you it's 15 years later, it's 20 years later. Well, we'll see why in the next chapter why that's not possible. It's because of the age of King David, but we'll come to that later. But anyway, I believe it's about 30 years later, and then we come to 1 Samuel 15. So this is 30 years into his reign. Samuel also said unto Saul, The Lord sent me to anoint thee to be king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore hearken thou unto the voice of the words of the Lord. Now you may be saying to yourself, in 1 Samuel 13, whenever they're getting ready for the battle of Michmash, Saul is, all the army's departing, so he goes ahead and he makes the sacrifices, he disobeys God, Samuel shows up and rebukes him. You may be saying, well, why is Saul still reigning over Israel? Wasn't he told right then that the kingdom would be taken from him? If you go back and reread 1 Samuel 13, you will see that it doesn't say that Saul himself will be dethroned. It merely says that his descendants would not take over his throne after that. It just says that the line will be severed. After him, none of his sons would become king. Now, that's very important to remember for what's about to happen. So Saul hasn't been told that he'll be dethroned. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel, how he laid wait for him in the way when he came up from Egypt. The very first army that attacked Moses and the Israelites in the wilderness after they had crossed the Red Sea were the Amalekites, Amalek. And these were descendants of Esau. Amalek was the grandson of Esau, Jacob's brother, Israel's brother. Well, the Amalekites, they were the first people, after the Egyptians were done with, the Amalekites came and they attacked Moses and the Israelites in the wilderness for no reason. No reason. The Amalekites were known as a nomadic, tribal, raider-like tribe. They were not necessarily an established nation so much as they just seemed to be going like the Huns, just going and killing, looting, and pillaging wherever they can just to get, and then they would settle southward of Israel later on. But we're being told about this, how God tells them, the Amalekites, back then whenever they attacked Moses and them, because they attacked at the rear of them, very cowardly like. The Amalekites attacked Israel at the rear where the old women were, and the women, and the children, and the feeble men, and most of the treasure, where all of this was. It's a very cowardly display by the Amalekites, and God says, from generation to generation will I fight the Amalekites. And we see now, coming upon this, it's about 400 years later, and the Amalekites have grown into a pretty sizable army now. They're more established as a nation, and we're seeing what God is telling them now, and they have been fighting the Amalekites since, off and on since. Now go, God says, and smite Amalek, and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass. That would be a very, very hard thing for most people to accept, especially today in this PC culture that they don't understand. I liken it to this. Amalek is a lot like a neighbor whom consistently breaks into your house while you're gone, while you're there, whatever. Consistently breaks in, steals. They were known to be no honor involved in these evil, evil people, and pagan, always pagan. But anyway, it's a lot like a neighbor who breaks into your house, but it's far worse than any ordinary break in or robber, thief, if you will. This neighbor actually has the intent to kill you and your family. The Philistines, whom Saul, we learned about, defeated early on, and they had been off and on with this war and war and war, and then alliance with the Philistines. At least they had some kind of shaky alliance with the Philistines and the neighboring tribes, but they never had an alliance with Amalek. They seemingly never ever had any kind of stable peace with these people. They were always horrible, horrible people to the Israelites. They hated Israel. Israel did not like them. And God is saying, do away with all of them. And you say, wait a minute, even the women and the children and the ox and the sheep, the camel and the ass, even their animals have nothing to do with this. Well, their children don't know anything. And Saul gathered the people together and numbered them in Telaim 200,000 footmen and 10,000 men of Judah. And Saul came to a city of Amalek and laid wait in the valley. And Saul said unto the Kenites, Go, depart, get you down from among the Amalekites, lest I destroy you with them. For ye showed kindness to all the children of Israel when they came up out of Egypt. So the Kenites departed from among the Amalekites. The Kenites, we learn in the book of Judges, and the children of the Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, went up out of the city of palm trees with the children of Judah into the wilderness of Judah, which lieth in the south of Arad, and they went and dwelt among the people. So we see, remember how Jethro, he was a worshiper of God. He was also a Kenite, and these have also a bit of a branch connection with Abraham as well. So the Kenites were always, for the most part, as far as I read, kind to Israel. So we see right here how God isn't out to just butcher people. There's a reason why he is solely attacking the Amalekites. The Amalekites are just an evil, evil people, and we'll learn later on the kind of damage that happens whenever Saul spares Agag and he spares other Amalekites. We'll talk about that right here in just a second. And Saul smote the Amalekites from Havilah until thou comest to Shur, that is over against Egypt. If you'll see right here, just to give a visual of the Amalekites, we'll see that they fought the Amalekites all the way down, even into bordering Egypt and such. They fought them all southward right here. And right here's, just to give a broad a look at this, right here's where the Ammonites were. Right here's Israel. Philistines to the west, Ammonites right here, Moabites right here, Edomites right here, Amalekites right here. Now, take just a look at this. The Ammonites were descendants from Lot, Abraham's nephew. So right here, the Ammonites and the Moabites, both descendants of Lot, they were neighboring with Israel to the east. Now, right down here, you have the Edomites, whom were descendants of Esau, as well as the Amalekites, who were also descendants of Esau, branched off through his grandson. So we're seeing to the south, Esau, and right here, Lot. Now Saul does go in and he does fight the Amalekites. And he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. Now, whenever it says this, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword, the people of the land is the implication right there, because we know that the Amalekites, they lived on for quite a number of years after this. As a matter of fact, up until the time of Hezekiah in First Chronicles 4, I believe, First Chronicles 4, Hezekiah, many, many years later, finally does away with the Amalekites. We never hear anything else about the Amalekites after Hezekiah. So there are some left alive, but they're not within the land of the Amalekites right now, what was known as the land of the Amalekites. So there are some scattered abroad and such. And Haman in the book of Esther is the descendant of Agag, this very same Agag, whom we've already went over Esther. But Haman, the right hand of Xerxes, Ahasuerus, whatever you wish to call him, but Haman was a descendant of Agag, and we see the kind of trouble that comes from not wiping them out completely all over the place. We also hear about David fighting them, and these people, they just continue. They never ever try to make peace with Israel, but even the ones in whom are left after this great battle, they still come back and try to fight them. But Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep and of the oxen, of the fatlings and the lambs, and all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them, but everything that was vile and refuse that they destroyed utterly. This is, a lot of people would say, well, what's the problem? Why did God say, go and destroy these, all their livestock? Well, coming right back to what I just said a few minutes ago, whenever the Amalekites attacked Israel in the wilderness with Moses and the Israelites and Joshua, whenever they first attacked them, they came to loot them and kill them. Like the Amalekites wanted to kill the Israelites, but also it was out of greed. Okay? I believe by reading this that God is trying to make a point. He's saying this has nothing to do with the wealth of the Amalekites. This has nothing whatsoever to do with what they have or how beautiful their land is and how they just want to. He says this is because of the people. He says, I want to totally annihilate them. I don't want a single bit of what you have. This is God's judgment upon the people. We see in how God is saying, I don't want anything that you all have. Totally different heart. Okay. And David, as we'll learn about, David and Samuel, as he displays in this very chapter, they have the heart of God, and they wish to annihilate these people. And you may say, well, that's kind of harsh. I mean, the Amalekites, something that they did 400 years prior, they're being judged for. Oh, no. We learn in this very chapter how what Samuel says to Agag. He says, you have been vicious in murder. He says, because you have made so many wives widows. These were a murderous, vicious people. Then came the word of the Lord unto Samuel, saying, It repenteth me that I have set up Saul to be king, for he has turned back from following me, and hath not performed my commandments. And it grieved Samuel, and he cried unto the Lord all night. That is one thing that you do not want to hear God say. Just real quick note, this struck me. You do not want to hear God say. It's like I'm a preacher, and it'd be crushing to hear God say, it repents me that I've ever made you a preacher of mine. That would probably be the most crushing thing that I could hear as a Christian. And when Samuel rose early to meet Saul in the morning, it was told Samuel, saying, Saul came to Carmel, and behold, he set him up a place, and is gone about, and passed on, and gone down to Gilgal. And Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said unto him, Blessed be thou of the Lord, I have performed the commandment of the Lord. And Samuel said, What meaneth this bleating of the sheep in mine ears, and the lowing of the oxen which I hear? This is so just like backslidden people whenever they back. I remember years ago I had backslidden into getting high again. I was, smoking again, and getting high all the time. Every day. Now, it hurt me at first, but after a while, I became more and more desensitized to it, and it didn't bother me. Well, I remember I lived alone, and I thought, well, this is a victimless thing. I'm not hurting anybody. I feel better. Everything's good. And I remember just at random times, my pastor would show up, My family would show up just at random moments. They would just pop in, and I'd be high as a cat, and they would see me. And I was so in a delusion at that time, and I was high, which doesn't help the delusion. But I didn't think I was doing anything wrong. I thought I'm a grown man. I'm just taking it easy. It's not a big deal. But now that I look back, I can see how they knew, and the shame was there, even though they didn't want to, show it to me right off. They acted perfectly normal as far as it goes, but there was still that little hint where they was like, oh no, you know. And I was in such a delusion. And right here, Saul is, and he's saying, I'm doing everything good and everything that God wants. I'm doing all that the Lord wills. And you can hear the sheep of the Amalekites in the background. You could probably smell the sacrifice burning. It was probably all around him, evidence that he disobeyed God, but he didn't see it. Because once that you've backslidden so much, you're blind. And Saul said, they have brought them from the Amalekites. He's blaming the people. For the people spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen to sacrifice unto the Lord thy God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed. Saul has such a huge problem with his ego. Saul actually believes that he is a great, great man. He's just been that tall guy his whole life, and of course he has, and he's just walked around thinking that he was just better and bigger than everybody else, and he could never do any wrong. Remember how at the sacrifices he speaks and he blames Samuel. There's a little hint of blame that he places upon Samuel. He says, you didn't come in the 7 days that you told me that you would, so I went ahead and did this, kind of like Adam and Eve and the snakes. It goes right back to passing the buck. Nobody wants personal responsibility. Completely different with King David. King David, if he just committed a single little sin, or a big one, as he does with Uriah and Bathsheba, but whenever he sins, he immediately says, I have sinned. This is mine. And that's the reason why he makes such a better king, and he's known as the man after God's own heart. Then Samuel said unto Saul, Stay, and I will tell thee what the Lord hath said to me this night. And he said unto him, Say on. And Samuel said, When thou wast little in thine own sight, wast thou not made the head of the tribes of Israel, and the Lord anointed thee king over Israel? What he's meaning right here, this is figurative language. When thou wast little in thine own sight, he's meaning whenever you were humble, whenever you weren't so puffed up with pride. And now Saul believes that he's just the best king in the world. He's had these victories, and now he's rejoicing, all this loot and everything. But he says, whenever you were humble, he says, God made you the king. And the Lord sent thee on a journey, and said, Go and utterly destroy the centers of the Amalekites, and fight against them until they be consumed. Wherefore then didst thou not obey the voice of the Lord, but didst fly upon the spoil, and didst evil in the sight of the Lord? And Saul said unto Samuel, Yea, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord, and have gone the way which the Lord sent me, and have brought Agag, the king of Amalek, and have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. Samuel just got done telling this blind fool. He just got done telling him. He said, God told you to go and utterly destroy the Amalekites. Idiot Saul says, Yeah, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord, and have gone the way which the Lord sent me, and have brought Agag, the king of the Amalekites. He just said, Yeah, I've done. Just look at how blind this man is. He says, I've done everything that God told me. I have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. Oh, by the way, right here's their king. You kept the most crucial one alive that God wanted dead, probably more than any of them. I believe this happens a lot with career politicians as well. There's an awful lot of these politicians that have been in office for decades and decades. And I believe that it happens with them the same way that it happens with Saul. They get into a feeling of comfort, and they start believing that every single thing that they do is godly, and they believe that everything they do is right because they've always got these yes men around them, and they've always been catered to and brought things and respected, and exalted among others. And it's just after year after year after year, it just gets worse and worse. Their ego gets worse and worse, and they become blind. But the people took of the spoils, sheep and oxen, the chief of the things which should have been utterly destroyed, to sacrifice unto the Lord thy God in Gilgal. And Samuel said, Hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. Many, many people, Christians, they come on out, or supposedly Christians, they come out and they say, look at all that I've done for this church. I've given all this money. I've fed the poor. And even atheists, they believe that if they've put millions in feeding the poor and curing whatever cancer stuff that'll never be cured, and they believe that the more good that they do for their fellow human beings, then the more godly that they must be. It's the same way with these burnt offerings and sacrifices. Ceremonially, they're going through all the rituals, but it's just like the Pharisees of Jesus' day, how they would do it for a public display. And we're about to see that, how he only does it to appear godly. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because thou hast rejected the word of the Lord, he hath also rejected thee from being king. Now he's saying, you're dethroned, Saul. Okay, now you're no longer even looked at as a king in God's sight. And eventually, very, very quickly, in the people's side as well, they start wanting David more and more, that they see David. And we'll see the first appearance of David in the next chapter. And Saul said unto Samuel, I have sinned. Now look at his heart. Now he's saying, look, I've sinned. I'm sorry. Now that he knows, he's so self-absorbed that the second that it hits him personally, he didn't much care as much about his descendants not taking the throne as much as he does himself. And Saul said unto Samuel, I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord in thy words, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. See, right here, there's a little bit of a he's right in his words, but not in his heart, or at least for the long term. He may be momentarily very repentant, because we see how Samuel joins in with his worship. Now therefore, I pray thee, pardon my sin, and turn again with me, that I may worship the Lord. And Samuel said unto Saul, I will not return with thee, for thou hast rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord hath rejected thee from being king over Israel. And as Samuel turned about to go away, he laid hold upon the skirt of his mantle, and it rent. And Samuel said unto him, The Lord hath rent the kingdom of Israel from thee this day, and hath given it to a neighbor of thine that is better than thou. That would have been very, very harsh. This is very adamant upon God. And he's not only just telling Saul and letting him hear it, he's also letting him see it. By Saul's own hand has he lost the kingdom. Notice that. Because God likens this to how he lost his kingdom. The prophets leaving him because he's disobeyed God, and Saul all the while got a hold of his mantle, and he's the one, through his tight grip on power and what he wants to have done, it's his will over God's will, it tears away from him because of that, and it stands alone in his hand. And also the strength of Israel, God, will not lie nor repent, for he is not a man that he should repent. This is very good for Saul to hear. Samuel says God is the strength of Israel. God is the reason why you've won these battles. It is God's hand at work, not yours. Then he said, I have sinned, yet honor me now, I pray thee, before the elders, now listen to this, before the elders of my people and before Israel, and turn again with me, that I may worship the Lord thy God. He has still, all he wants to do is appear godly. See, because he knows that with Samuel making such a public display of this and telling him in front of all the elders, he says, now you're no longer king. God no longer. And you see how Saul is begging and begging, because he knows the implications of this. He knows that all of a sudden his power and his glory, it all fades away at that moment. So he's begging Samuel. He says, do this in front of the elders. Make sure that the elders see this. He doesn't care so much about what God sees, as we have already witnessed. He doesn't care so much about that. It's all these little mistakes that he makes that shows his true heart. He's not willing to complete. But anyway, he's wanting the elders to see, that way he can keep power over Israel. So Samuel turned again after Saul, and Saul worshipped the Lord. Then said Samuel, Bring ye hither to me Agag the king of the Amalekites. And Agag came unto him delicately. And Agag said, Surely the bitterness of death is past. You can kind of see in Agag's response to being brought before the prophet, he no doubt thought to himself, well, the king spared me, this man of war spared me, so this very nice prophet, he's going to let me go. And so he comes to him delicately, like you would a preacher or something, and he says, Surely the bitterness of death is past. Well, he doesn't know that the true God is working through this prophet, and the true God does not like him at all. And Samuel said, As thy sword, listen to this. This is the heart of the Amalekites and the whole reason why they should have been slaughtered. As thy sword hath made women childless, so shall thy mother be childless among women. And Samuel hewed Agag in pieces before the Lord in Gilgal. This would have been a very traumatic display. I mean, he didn't just kill him. I've watched movies where it just shows Samuel, sticking him with a sword and he dies. No, he hacks him in pieces. He actually takes it, and he does it before the Lord. He's not doing this before Israel. He doesn't care if Israel's around. This is what God wanted, and Samuel, being obedient, Saul is no doubt watching this and thinking, that's what I should have done to them. That's what I had to do. Well, no wonder, it's because he brought him in. He was treating him kingly, no doubt Saul thought, well, we're kings. We'll have dinner together and we'll talk and I'll show my power over him. God says, kill him. And Samuel doesn't just kill him, hacks him up. Then Samuel went to Ramah, and Saul went up to his house to Gibeah of Saul. Now, once again, this is where they believe Ramah was, but it wasn't. It's right up here in Ramathaim Zophim. That's his hometown. And right down here, Gibeah, is where Saul was located. And Samuel came no more to see Saul until the day of his death. Nevertheless, Samuel mourned for Saul, and the Lord repented that he had made Saul king over Israel. This is whenever it starts to really, really, really get bad for Saul. Not only that, the Lord himself is no longer with him, or he's not protecting him, and we'll start seeing how demons began attacking Saul. Beings that he can't fight against, they start vexing him now. Okay, so it goes all the more to what I spoke of yesterday about the hedge that God puts up around us, like he did Job. It goes all the more to how important that hedge truly is. And we see now that it's been taken down from Saul, and it's been built up around David in the next chapter, which we, Lord willing, may get into tomorrow. God, peace be with you. Amen.